Excited to know that the dream of an organization they conceived over 70 years ago continues in this 21st century. Modern, current, still encouraging, and fighting the battles that nurses often face. Now, in the 1800s, Bermuda had three hospitals. They were not for civilians. They were military and naval hospitals. There were three on the mainland, but there was one on Ports Island, and that was for the yellow fever epidemic patients. In the 1800s, there were four yellow fever epidemics in Bermuda, and 13,000 people, for naval people and local people who died during that time. Um, these hospitals did not serve civilians. Now, the only known Bermudian to have trained in one of these hospitals was Cordelia Fubler, who was in the 1900s recorded as a nurse midwife in Somerset and the community areas. Now, what happened, I'll tell you about what happened to her later, but she assisted Dr. Richard Packwood, who unbelievably performed tonsillectomies, amputations, and various surgeries in his home office. And that home today is where he lived, is the Packwood Care Facility, which has been named for him. And he was, I think, the fourth doctor on the Bermudian Register of Doctors, and he specialized in surgery from the University of Michigan. Another nurse to be remembered is Eliza Jane Lusher, who in 1855 she made application to the governor of Bermuda, who felt she was a worthy candidate, and he applied to the British Home Office for her to join the others in the Crimean War, but the British Home Office refused her. She was the same. She was the same. It was the same war where Florence Nightingale became famous and Mary Seacole of Jamaica. They became monumental figures in nursing history. Um, Now, what they asked her to do was to care for the yellow fever victims, and she is recorded as saving many of these victims. Although they promised to pay her, they did not. And so when she took her case, the government met in Parliament, and 5 voted for her to have it, and 13 voted that she should not get it. And so what happened? She died in poverty, undervalued and unappreciated. The first Bermudian nurse of color to study abroad was Mary Sion, who graduated in 1895 from the Providence Medical College and Hospital in Chicago. But upon her return, there was nowhere really for her to work, so I'm assuming she did private work. Now, the first and only hospital for civilians was established for the mentally ill in 1846. It was called the Lunatic Asylum, or the Mental Hospital, if they wanted to be nice, called it the Mental Hospital, and was located in a walled-in area in North Shore, overlooking the water there in North Shore, and it was there for many years. It was established 25 years before they employed a Bermudian, and she was the assistant matron, Catherine Watson. Her staff would have been untrained helpers, and it remained at that location for 26 years before moving to the location of Maui as you know it today. Now, the first psychiatrically trained Bermudian of color, because I couldn't find any training for Catherine Watson, would have been Marlene Simmons, who came back to Bermuda in 1955. Now, Marlene Simmons was highly trained. She was a registered nurse, she was a midwife, she was also a psychiatrically trained nurse, but she was also a health visitor. So what happened, she worked within the health department, and she was their mental welfare officer. But she married a Trinidadian, so she only stayed here for a year. So from so what she did, she stayed here for a year, and then she got married and moved to Trinidad. That was the end of that. And she has recently died. I tried to interview her when she came to Bermuda, but I wasn't able to. Now, Edward Dyer returned in 65 as the first Bermudian psychiatrically trained and generally trained nurse.
Mhm.
He began his career at Maui, but he, um, he, 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 they had hit upon an idea of having clinics in the prisons. So of course he was selected to transfer to the prisons. And of course he was instrumental in these clinics and another place for nurses to work in Bermuda. So that's why a lot of the men and people sworn here, they all went to care facilities. And eventually, although he was a nurse, in the end, he retired as the commissioner of prisons. Now, in the mid-1800s, we still don't have a general hospital, don't forget that. So, in the mid-1800s, Dr. Eldon Harvey returned to Bermuda. And he felt there was a need because, not because of us, but there were tourists coming. So you had to have a hospital for tourists. And deserving residents. I don't think I look like one of those deserving residents, but that's how it went.
Well put.
It took him 8 years to raise the money to have this little hospital because they didn't see the need for it. You know, you were born at home, you took sick at home and you died. What you need a hospital for? So it took him 8 years of pleading and getting private funds to open this hospital. Now when it opened, it was strictly for white people. So they would take a black patient, but the nurses were not black and neither were the doctors. And nurses came up from Barbados and Turks Island, but they had to be white to work in that facility. Now, it was such a small place. They had 8 beds. 6 were for men and 2 for women. Now don't ask me why. 6 for men and 2 for women. So he had a lot of opposition. But that is the cottage hospital up at Happy Valley. And this general hospital occurred 38 years after the first psychiatric hospital. It shows you how much we were here. It must be remembered that during that era, Bermuda was racially segregated, which was a difficult issue for black Bermudians who wanted to choose nursing as a career, because where would they go to work? So what happened now, the Bermuda Nursing Home, which is still on Curvin Avenue, it's a building on Curvin Avenue, was founded by the Bermuda Lodges in 1905, and it became the original training ground for the black nurses. Now there was an army chaplain here at Prospect who was also a doctor, and he said that there was a desperate need to provide medical care for the local community. And these nurses played a vital role in district and midwifery work, but are also credited with saving the lives of many affected in the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. Bermuda's population then was 20,000 and 139 people died. Now by 1920, they clued in, maybe we should have a hospital, and so King Edward was built. And so the cottage hospital closed and it moved to King Edward. Well, what I couldn't quite understand, and I was talking to Dr. Emery about this, why would they open first with surgical units? 2 surgical units. They could take 32 patients. They had 5 nurses and 2 probationers. Medical units followed later. It offered a 4-year training program with all expenses paid training for the last 14 months at Montreal General Hospital. They spent 6 months in a maternity hospital, 3 months in a children's hospital, and 2 months in an isolation hospital. And as I said, the white women came up to take advantage. Bermuda had few white nurses, and so what they did, they brought them in from Canada. Now, in the 1920s, the government, they were very wise, they implemented a law requiring all midwives to sit in a written examination. Most of the practicing midwives had no formal training, and of course they failed the exam, except Cordelia Fubby, who had trained at the military hospital. This created a problem for the midwives, because this profession was passed down within families, and so it had a devastating effect on their livelihood. Now, a group of white women capitalized on this because they formed the Bermuda Welfare Society. Now, what they did to prevent black women from working, they said you needed a Queen's District Nursing certificate. Bermudians had mainly trained in America, and so they wouldn't employ them in the hospital, and the Welfare Society wouldn't employ them. So what happened, they imported nurses from England. And so each nurse was assigned a parish and a house that went with the parish. This immediate discrimination against the black trained midwives and nurses. So in 1967, 38 years after the Bermuda Welfare Society began, they employed their first Bermudian of color. She was Queen's nurse Leonie Harper. And then she was followed by Sandra Allen, who had St. George's, and then I had Smith Parish. The problem then became the white population, because you had that white uniform, you looked very much like a maid to me, and so when we would go, they wouldn't open the front door. And we were always directed to the back. I loved it, because I'd pull up, and they'd send me to the back, but I'd get in my car and go somewhere else. I was too busy. And I figured, you can't be dying because you came to the door. And so I was telling my son, and I was particularly mean, I would go twice a day. So finally, one of the doctors called and said, "Nurse, we don't understand it. You're going to the patients, but you won't come in." I said, "Well, here's a shot across your bow, right? We go through the door where we park the car. If the car is there, that's where we knock on the door. I am not doing back doors. So you tell your clients, if they want a nurse, open the damn door."
For you.
And I still remember those houses and those people. I still remember them. And I was telling my son, I had problems with the Welfare Society because their treasurer thought the back door was just fine too. So for a couple of months, my father supported me because finally it clicked. These women are not doing back doors. After that, everything was quite fine. So if you all know Miss Alice, she was probably worse than I was. Now, 16 years after the Cottage Hospital moved to become King Edward, the Bermuda nursing home fell into disrepair, and so it moved to the Cottage Hospital building, which is why people mix up the two, and the name then changed to the Cottage Hospital Nursing Home. Now, Bermudians of color who wanted to study nursing abroad faced many challenges. One remembered all applications had to be sent to Dr. Wilkinson, who was the chief medical officer. And she thought she was slick because she sent self-addressed envelopes, but he wouldn't respond. So she decided, she had some nerve, she decided she'd breeze on down to his office. And she said the man was bright red when she got there, and he was shocked that she had the audacity to present herself. And so she was given 2 weeks to get out. You're approved, but you get 2 weeks to find a hospital and leave the island. And what they didn't know, she applied to accept it beforehand. So another recalls all overseas applications having to be sent to the matron of King Edward, who would quickly inform her that her application was unsuccessful. Fortunately, her brother was in England as a dockyard apprentice, so he went up to the hospital, St. Mary's in Portsmouth, and she said they had never received applications from anybody from Bermuda. And she accepted her. Many black students went directly to the Lincoln Hospital in New York, while others were sent there by the Bermuda government. I don't know why they did that, because they knew they weren't going to employ them, but anyhow, the natives were restless, I guess. So they sent people who trained at the Cottage Hospital, they sent them as well to Lincoln just to do an additional year. Now, returning to Bermuda, King Edward was still not going to employ them because they trained in America. They remained desperately understaffed. But rather than do that, once again, they brought nurses in large numbers from Canada. It was 1947 that the Department of Health began employing the local nurses, and the first being Nurse Sylvia Richardson, of whom the home has been named. And in the 50s, there was a hospital at Kingley Air Force Base. There were many hospitals in Bermuda, but in more recent times, but they were not really for the local people. They were for the Army and the Navy personnel. So in the 1950s, Kingley Air Force Base had a hospital, and they employed American trained nurses. And of course, this included the recently deceased Grace Washington, whose daughter was here this evening. By 1953, the continuing unrest and disparity of employment resulted in the colonial parliament appointing an interracial committee to address nursing issues. Still, there was no change when in 1955, Moira Cann was employed by the family of Dr. E.F. Gordon, who throughout his career fought the rights of Bermudian nurses. Often as he lay there dying, he asked, "How are they treating you?" Well, of course, how could you tell him? I couldn't go in the dining room. I couldn't walk in the halls because I might see a work nurse and speak to her. I ate my food and I changed my clothes. But she told him, all was well, things have changed. Man was dying, So he died contented, thinking that things were all right. Now, finally, in 1958, there was a reluctant change. Barbara Wade returned to Bermuda and applied to King Edward. Now, her mother, she was not accepted. She wasn't a midwife. And she said, Barbara said, I didn't want to be a midwife. I didn't take that. So they said, well, we can't accept you. But her mother knew of a white nurse who had the identical qualifications. She was accepted, and King Edward was sending her to Canada to do obstetrics. Now, for Bermudians here, if you knew Sandra Allen, well, Barbara Wade's mother and Sandra Allen, they're all related. And they don't take ignorance very kindly. So Barbara's mother stopped up to King Edward, went in the matron's office, and Barbara told me, I don't know what happened, but I was on a plane to Canada with the white nurse. And they remained friends until they died, So, So she became the first Bermudian of color to be employed for King Edward. But because of the way they treated her there, they were not welcoming. And as a result, few other black nurses would apply to go to King Edward. Now, when Nurse Kara Spencer Wilson returned to Bermuda in 1930, she also struggled to find employment. But Hamilton Parish, where she grew up, formed their own district nursing organization. So she was the district nurse, the midwife, they had a child clinic, they were all set up. They had men who would accompany her at night for her deliveries. And when I came home, she was still working. So I came in, I started working in 68, she was still working, and she worked the only nurse until she retired in 1971. So when I came home, we had a little arrangement. She kept her mouth shut, and I kept my mouth shut. I said, plan your holiday, don't tell anybody. And so I did her work for a month. And the patients knew not to say a word. So that was, and she was, she married late in life, and she wanted time with her husband. So that worked out very well. She, along with Sylvia Richardson and many others, founded the Bermuda Graduate Nurses Association because they trained in America with oversized graduate nurses. They formed it in the 50s to support the challenges of this segregated society. She became my mentor and encouraged me during those difficult years and often really challenging years. We were, Ms. Kara Spencer and Wilson and I were on the legislative team picked me up in her car. Lord have mercy, she drove like a lunatic. But anyway, she was ready for the challenge. And she was one of the first, if not the first woman in Bermuda to drive, you know. Anyhow, I said, girl, I took myself down there and I bought myself a car. Now, we were on the legislative team, and our aim was to amalgamate these two racially divided associations. And as you know, both organizations applied for membership into the International Council of Nurses in Switzerland, but they wouldn't accept from a country two separate organizations. You had to amalgamate. Now, together, we met with King Edward Matron, and they had a lawyer. Our lawyer was Dame Lewis Brown. I don't need to turn up with you. You've got Nurse Caro with you. So, Nurse Caro, for me, was an education in itself. She would breeze into Miss Derrick, Jan Derrick's office. She was fiery. She had no nonsense. But her career challenges had prepared her for occasions such as this. And King Edward Matron clearly had met her match, because she was a very controlling woman. No, as Karen Spencer Wilson said, no, we're not abiding by that. We are joining together. You're not having more than we're having. You know, we're going to be joining. So this forced the racial integration of the two organizations. Now, I must tell you that integration of nurses took place before the integration of schools in Bermuda. Because schools integrated in 1971, the year my son here was born. So you know what that looks like. You look at his age and you think, you know, we were segregated until then. Now, in 1970, the Bermuda Welfare Society, with its district nurse midwives, was taken over by the Department of Health, and the home delivery service was discontinued. The Bermuda Nursing Council was established in '69, and in 1970, the nurses within the health department had a dispute, which led to their membership in the Bermuda Public Service Union, and the dispute, as it usually is, with foreign nurses, you know, and they didn't want to join, and we had to be very clever. And I refuse to disclose how we won. But all I say, never put the fox in the hen house. Put two foxes in the house, but we won. Anyhow, now in 1970, King Edward introduced a 2-year enrolled nursing program. Granville Russell was the only male in the first group, and he was top of the class. This program was discontinued in 1976 because it became oversubscribed. The pioneers in local nursing can now look upon Bermuda today and know that in the final analysis, their strength of character and perseverance was all worthwhile. Today, this organization is the fulfillment of a dream conceived many years ago. The dream that in Bermuda, nurses of all ethnic backgrounds and from countries all over the world can work together in harmony. This evening, this is hard. This evening, I wish to thank you for carrying the torch forward.
I was going to choke too, so you'll be all right.
I am thankful of the three of that original group, Annette Lightman, Cynthia Stoller, and myself are here to witness your progress. We're proud of you and wish you well.